everybody. Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Emerson Latzia hanging out in the DraftKings studio in Boston. We got a great show for you guys today, as always. Make sure you're downloading, subscribing, rating, and reviewing us, leaving a 5-star rating, and checking us out live Monday through Friday here on DraftKingsNetwork.com, DraftKings YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and more. Steve Avila, offensive lineman, rookie standout for the Los Angeles Rams, going to join us for the show today, as well as Lorenzo Alexander, former Buffalo Bills linebacker. As Dad, we get set for Super Wildcard Weekend coming up. It's finally here. We have gone through and waded through so much coaching news in the last few days. This week has felt long as hell coming off the short week last week for the new year, and now we finally get to the actual football spread out Saturday to Monday.
Yeah, listen, we know this is what happens now until you get to that first playoff weekend, as all the coaching talk, and it got magnified with Belichick being involved, and obviously Saban on the college side, Pete Carroll as well, and all the openings that we have. But yeah, now it's down to football. Now it is down to – it's always interesting when you get to the playoffs and it's one and done. You always have that next week where you can make things up. Now you don't. So to me, I always look for players. First off, players that aren't the stars, who steps up, who becomes that guy that makes some plays that not a lot of people know. And the other thing is, do you press? Do you try and do more than you should, because if you lose the game, you're going to go home. Football is about 11 guys on the field and trusting the guy next to you to do his job. So are there players out there, and there are every year in every game, and not just the playoffs, that sometimes try and do too much because so much is on the line of moving on. And that's always an interesting situation. Something I think like a team like Philadelphia is already there. Philadelphia is not used to being, what they used to being what they were is 10-1, even though not playing great, but then losing 5 of 6. You wonder if the frustration in the press level that starts to hit, and now it gets magnified because the wildest thing about the playoffs, and I made it, I think 3-4 times or so, lost in the first round except for 1 year. 1 year we won the wild card round, went to the divisional round. But the thing about it is, when you make the playoffs, you think you're going to make a run. And it's so wild that you prepare everything to win that game and move on. And then the losing team, the next day, you're at the facility packing up your locker. It's wild. It's just a weird sensation that season is now over. Whatever team structure this is not going to be the same the next year. So you think it's going on, and then boom, when the clock hits zeros, it's over and you're cleaning everything out.
Yeah, a bunch of creatures of habit having their habit and routine ripped away from them pretty unceremoniously here. And you mentioned there's going to be a lot of teams with varying approaches to this. We've got a lot of the juicy storylines that come with that, between Matthew Stafford making his return trip back to Detroit and the hottest ticket of the weekend, some of the age versus experience with the Texans and the Browns kickstarting the weekend, Joe Flacco, who's made a Super Bowl run against the C.J. Stroud-led Houston Texans team that might be young enough to not know what they don't know, and teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, the Philadelphia Eagles, that are defending Super Bowl appearers but might not be the full version of themselves that we saw during last season. How do they grapple with that? Do they press? That's all going to be there. But Dad, you said do your job. Good time to revisit yesterday, as before we got off the show, we hadn't heard from Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, as that was the big news from yesterday, amongst others in that 24-hour stretch that saw Pete Carroll and Nick Saban also call it quits at their respective locations. Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots fully labeling this as mutually agreeing to part ways. And yesterday, after our show got done, we saw Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft both get up at the press conference and talk about this tenure and what it meant to the organization.
Robert and I, after a series of discussions, have mutually agreed to part ways. And for me, this is a day of gratitude and celebration. We had a vision of building a winner, building a championship football team here, and that's exceeded my wildest dreams and expectations. The amount of success that we were able to achieve together. So many fond memories and thoughts that I think about the Patriots, and I'll always be a Patriot. I look forward to coming back here, but at this time, we're gonna move on, and I look forward. I'm excited for the future. But always very, very appreciative of the opportunity here, the support here, and what you've done for me. Thank you.
Coach Belichick will forever be celebrated as a legendary sports icon here in New England, and I believe go in as a Pro Football Hall of Famer on the first ballot. Why? Because he is the greatest coach of all times, which makes this decision to part ways so hard. But this is a move that we mutually agreed that is needed at this time.
Mutually agree is always going to draw eyes from me.
Yeah.
It's almost never a mutual agreement, and I think it was just a couple of days ago we heard Bill Belichick insinuate that he'd be willing to give up GM duties to potentially stick around in New England. So, Dad, I have a feeling there was one side that wanted this a little bit more than the other, but I was amazed with the amount of grace and fondness that Bill Belichick talked about the experience with.
Well, I'm glad he did, because these are one of those situations, and they don't always end amicable. I mean, it's like at the end of the day, you look at it as a business and we came at it from the player side and that's the one thing you try and get up to past younger players. Remember, it's a business. Don't take things personal, because a lot of times they get personal or you get a bad ending. And I'm glad this one ended well, because I'm with you. I don't believe in the mutual thing. Bill still wants to coach. So, I mean, I would imagine Bill would have liked to keep coaching there. So that was, but I'm happy it went this way, because he'll be back at least for two reasons. One, when he's with another team coming into play in New England, and the other, the day he goes in the Ring of Honor at New England. So that's a given. I was happy it went that way, because you try and listen for little one-liners, that may have things go a different way. But I never really heard that. I just heard the fondness and the mutual respect.
He had a great one-liner to start. I mean, Bill Belichick tried to come out guns blazing with jokes. Said, this is the most people I've seen in here since we signed Tebow. Everyone kind of didn't know how to react because they're so not used to Bill coming out there and actually trying to be funny. So it's now in a spot, Dad, for Robert Kraft and the Patriots side, where tremendous amount of pressure there, right? Because you have, before they were ready, and while they're going to say it's mutual, again, we got the indication from Bill he would have still wanted to be here, and I believe that's probably the case. If you're Robert Kraft, you have done the difficult thing, and we know in a lot of ways in sports, it's better to be early than late. See what the Packers have done with Jordan Love and how that appears to be paying dividends for them. That's what the Seahawks are trying to do right now with Pete Carroll and ousting him and trying to usher in a new era. But if you're Robert Kraft, you have now moved on from Tom Brady before he was ready to be done playing and watched him lift a Lombardi like we talked about yesterday. And now you're moving on from Bill Belichick before there would have been, I think, the ending that he would have liked there. And so what you've got to bring in now, I know I saw Jerod Mayo seems like he's the leader in the clubhouse here, the way they even structured his contract. They wouldn't have to go through the normal hiring process if they wanted to bring him on as the head coach, Dad. But, and again, pressure's all relative. These coaches all believe they can go in and do a good job. But for the Kraft family now, this is going to be a huge part of their legacy, how you handle the dismount and the next step in this franchise.
Yeah, it definitely is. I have a feeling it would end up being Jerod Mayo. You look at, he's 37 years old. You look at, because what owners do is they look at what other teams do, right? And I don't know how much Kraft does that, because they've been at the top of the mountain for so long. But you see a success of like Houston had. DeMeco Ryans is 39 years old. Jerod Mayo's 37 years old. You bring a guy, I'm not going to sit there and go with the linebacker connection. You got a guy who knows the system there and the way things are done, and had done it under Bill. So while I wouldn't expect the Bill Belichick way to be the Jerod Mayo way, he would do his own way. I could see that just happening, right? Instead of bringing in a retread or a different coordinator, bring in this guy. Now he's a defensive guy in Mayo, so then it would be really interesting on who he hired on the offensive side, right? Because that's the side of the ball they need that work on. they have to figure out the quarterback position to work on because it's always been a tough defense. Mayo was a linebacker. Mayo was on that side of the ball. So that would be the interesting conversation, I think, that he would have with Robert Kraft on who he would want to bring in on the offensive side of the ball. It's either that or Robert Kraft thinks, I need to bring in an offensive guy. I need to bring in maybe a young offensive mind to get this offense going. So, I thought Robert Kraft gave a really good interview as well about it. He was pretty candid about, what you look for next and such. Didn't lead down any path or anything. But it just seems to me like Mayo would be the good succession right now.
Yeah, if you don't want to go away from the identity altogether that's been there, it'd be a nice transition plan where you can start to go towards the future. And say it out loud. Let's start a linebacker trend in NFL head coaching.
Yeah.
We've done the pipeline thing with so many offensive coordinators from the Shanahan-McVay tree. Let's start the linebacker tree and just get former tone setters from the middle taking over NFL sidelines there. We'll obviously get to wait with that. It's part of an incredibly compelling coaching offseason in the NFL. We will get to the full preview, obviously, of Super Wildcard Weekend. We've got the Golic acrostic coming up here in the next hour. But Emerson, we yesterday on the other job that is like this in college football with the Alabama Crimson Tide, we saw the beginning of flight tracking season. We saw the beginning of the coaching search there. And we saw a very public rebuff of the Crimson Tide by Dan Lanning at Oregon.
Yeah, for sure. Alabama's next head coach will not be Dan Lanning. So he's been a popular name as a potential heir apparent to Nick Saban. He's staying at Oregon, and that is according to Dan Lanning himself.
Who has goals and aspirations? Raise your hand up. All right, everybody got goals and aspirations. You know how you get those? You be the best where you're at. If that's how you reach goals and aspirations, that's how great things happen. It's not about worrying about the next thing. It's about worrying what's right in front of you, 6 inches right in front of your face. I want to remind you guys what that means. You guys that just got here don't know them, right? But it means something to be an Oregon Duck. Everybody makes what? They all make commitments to things that they're going to do. A lot of starters. The world doesn't have a lot of what? Finishers. We're finishers.
I want to be here in Eugene for as long as Eugene will have me. This place has everything that I could possibly ever want. There's a little bit of a problem in society today with people looking for what's next and where there's an opportunity. And the reality is, the grass is not always greener. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene.
Listening and not watching, the text that flashed over at the end there said, if you're worried about your coach leaving, come to Oregon because the Ducks aren't going anywhere and I'm not going anywhere. Dad, Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks have been doing videos like this coming off every game during the season and flipped the coaching rumors of Alabama that had flight trackers saying there were flights from Eugene into Tuscaloosa and all this stuff, flipped it into a hype video for recruiting purposes in a way that is exactly why you were Alabama wanting Dan Lanning, because he understands the game right now in a way that I think very few young coaches do.
So I wonder if at the beginning of next week it'll come out that Dan Lanning got a bump in salary, right? I mean, because those agents now, the agents of he and Kalen DeBoer and Mike Norvell and Steve Sarkisian are all trying to get their coaches more money to stay where they are, or a monster bag if they're thinking about going to Alabama. So that had to make the players feel good, because it's one of the things that has definitely changed over time is that coach sitting in a living room and saying, I'm going to be there for your son. You were a parent to him at home. I am going to be pseudo that while he is in his college years. And now that just falls on deaf ears because coaches leave and now players can leave as well. And that's one of the things Saban said about why he was gone. He said he couldn't commit to these players because he would be more year to year because of his age and how it's all going. And that he couldn't commit to these guys for the 3-4 years to those players and the parents. And he couldn't do that. I thought it interesting, too, with Saban. He said 5 minutes before the team meeting, he was still deciding what to do and talking to his wife, Miss Terry, about it all the way up to that meeting, which leads me to wonder, Mike, is he going to have some of that regret? Because it doesn't sound like it was 100% I'm in with both feet retiring if he's saying he's doing it 5 minutes before the team meeting. And he said he's going to be around to help find the new coach. I wonder what his input is. I wonder, they're asking him names as well. So now you take one name out in Dan Lanning, who is secure at Oregon, now going to the Big Ten, making that one of the two super conferences we have. So, there's always the odds out there of who is going to be the next coach. But I'll be interested in Nick Saban's view on this and what he's contributing to the AD there as far as thoughts on who should be the next coach.
Well, Junior, I was going to say, even after the video, Dan Lanning still has the fourth best odds to be the next coach at Alabama.
It's unbelievable how persistent I'd imagine the people with money are down there. The other names that have sort of been mentioned in the wake of that video have been Mike Norvell at Florida State, who obviously has done an incredible job turning around that program from, I remember calling their game against Louisville where they started off 0-4 in 2021. 0-4 for, I think, the first time since the late 1970s in Tallahassee, to now a team that won 10 games a year ago, almost and should have made the college football playoff as an undefeated team this year, has worked the portal really well during his time there, bringing over a lot of great wide receiver talent. That was such a hallmark of that big play offense. Kalen DeBoer is another name that's getting brought up right now, and I'd have to imagine has Washington fans extremely rattled, considering, Dad, they're fresh off a national championship appearance. Yeah. They feel like they've got a guy that can help them through this transition to the Big Ten, as this is part of the calculus, right? We said this for Oregon, is they're well-resourced. Phil Knight is a backer there. We know what Oregon's been as one of the standard bearers when it comes to upgrading facilities and the other kind of things that are going to be around a program that you need, but also now getting the big television contract dollars that come with being one of the teams in the Power 2 conferences in the Big Ten and the SEC. Washington and Kalen DeBoer are positioned to be much in the same way, but this is also a Washington team, Dad, that is going to look a lot different next year with the amount of talent they're graduating, especially on offense at some key positions at wide receiver, at quarterback, along the offensive line. And so this is a guy who, because of what he's done at Washington in short order, being able to come in and really structure that program in a way that looks sound, that despite neither of these guys having experience in SEC country in the South, I'd imagine just from a football standpoint, especially for Kalen, an X's and O's standpoint, a lot of appeal.
It will be interesting, though, Mike, because you think Alabama job open. I mean, talk about right at the top of the list of a great job opening. Now, you'd be following Nick Saban, which is certainly tough to do. What about if big-time coaches start to say no? Already you have Dan Lanning. Let's see because these other guys are in nice situations. Norvell, we saw the injury just cost him from being in the Final Four. DeBoer was there in the title game. Sarkisian was in the playoffs. It'll be interesting if you start getting no's because the bag is full where they are. They're building what they have there. They're not following Nick Saban. So these are all schools and coaches you're talking about are part of schools that can match Alabama money. That can without question.
I would disagree in Florida State's case.
Yeah.
I do not think they're capable of ponying up that kind of money because I think they would have fired him a couple years ago if they had the kind of money around there to make those moves.
Well, they may not either because they got in trouble with the NCAA and they can't deal with suit and collectives anymore. So that may cost them money. So that will be the interesting part to me is if some of these coaches who start to say no and deep down in the truthful serum type thing, what coach Alabama gets, where was that coach on their want list?
And Junior, Norvell sent out a tweet yesterday that started with, "Great day to be a Florida State Seminole," while mentioning that a hashtag big man was coming to the program. So with that tweet, I think some Alabama fans began crossing his name off the coaching candidate list.
That ain't enough for me. You got to.
No, I agree. I'm just
If you're going to say no, you got to say no via incredibly well done video.
Yeah.
By the way, also quick shout out as people mention the top three candidates. Alabama offensive coordinator Tommy Rees getting some consideration. He's considered the only internal candidate being evaluated there. And I know the Tommy Rees haters out there are furious, and I can't wait to drink the sweet milk of your tears, finding out where Tommy ends up, considering all he's done in the last 2 seasons is take an Alabama team that most people looked at as one of the lesser talented in quite a while, and a quarterback in Jalen Milroe who didn't look like the last few quarterbacks in terms of talent, to the playoff after taking a Drew Pine-led Notre Dame team to the Gator Bowl for a win there here. Eat it.
three legendary coaches deciding to ride off into the sunset, at least currently yesterday. It's not shocking that a current coach not being let go, sticking around, was kind of swept under the rug a little bit. That's what happened in Chicago. Matt Eberflus was retained as the head man for the Bears, although the team did relieve offensive coordinator Luke Getsy of his duty. So here is Chicago general manager Ryan Poles on why he thinks Eberflus is still the man for the job in Chicago.
Just in terms of his leadership and stability, I really think that the head coach needs to be able to captain the ship when the seas are when the seas have storms, and really keep everything settled. When you go through hard times and you can keep everyone together, to me, that's like the critical piece in a big in a market like this. Like, you have to be strong. I mean, if he's jumping off the boat and everyone else starts jumping off the boat, it's a hot mess. So the stability was a big piece of it. The detail that he coaches with, taking some of the mistakes from the game, bringing them to practice, and making sure that we're doing things the right way. I saw a lot of progress in that. There's a reason why we went from 3 to 7 wins. The player aspect of it is important, but also the detail and bringing the team together and sticking through those hard times allowed us to push through. And you saw a lot of those wins happening towards the back end of the season.
All right, GoJo, he says the player aspect is important, so one can maybe read into this decision to keep Eberflus as an acknowledgement that the Bears will stick with Fields because the head coach will need to win in 2024, obviously, and maybe Fields is the best chance to do so. What do you think?
I still think that's pretty up in the air, and I think Ryan Poles, to his credit, has done a really good job in almost all of his public comments being pretty agnostic about their plans for the number 1 overall pick, because he understands, hey, it's good for business to have everyone not knowing what we're going to do at that spot. Maybe you get some insane offer that's impossible to turn down, and you're able to do that. You keep interest in Justin Fields that way. So, Dad, I ultimately think that is the right decision there, and the right decision when it comes to the head coaching tenure. We kind of talked about this yesterday. Is complicated because of the opportunity available this offseason with all the coaches there. Matt Eberflus deserves a lot of credit because at this point in the season, I don't think we remember how bad it was for the Bears at the start of the year. Like, we went through all of the very strange stuff surrounding the departure of Alan Williams, their defensive coordinator. Early in the season, you had Justin Fields stepping in front of the microphone, criticizing coaching, and then having to backtrack on criticizing coaching, all while the team was in a bit of a tailspin. And then from midseason on, they pulled out of it, and as a guy, we always talk about this, he was a defensive coach coming over. The defense kicked into gear the second half of the year. Montez Sweat got there, and they became one of the best defenses in all of football. And so he does deserve a ton of credit, as Ryan Poles indicated, for steering them through some very turbulent waters.
He does, and he has. Listen, either way, you're starting with another, offensive coordinator. Remember, Matt Eberflus is the defensive coach. So we had talked, and I did a couple of Bears games, and between a couple years ago and this year, and I wasn't alone in saying I didn't understand some of the play calls for Justin Fields and using his talents. And we figured this was going to be a parting of the ways with Luke Getsy, the offensive coordinator. I think the two things we saw for sure was that Matt Canada was going to be gone in Pittsburgh, which he was during the season, and Getsy was going to be gone at some point, and he was after the season. So that, again, all eyes on that hire by Matt Eberflus. Who are you getting to run the offense? Because now Justin Fields is dealing with a different system. And that's, while, nobody's going to feel sorry for a player. They're going to say adapt and survive. That is difficult to do, not for the court and just for the quarterback, but everybody else. Listen, they still need more help. They got help. They got DJ Moore, who had over 1,300 yards in the trade. Cole Kmet took the next step up. They need another receiver. They need a heavy-hitting running back. Fields led the team in rushing as well. Defensively, they started fixing some issues, getting Montez Sweat in that trade and giving him the deal. He did extremely well. So it's a team, I think, hopefully pointing in the right direction, but now the biggest decision is to be made about the most important decision. What are they going to do at quarterback? And you're right. I mean, Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus are not going to tip their hand at all about this, but, feverishly behind the scenes, you wonder what kind of phone calls are being made or taken as to the value of that number one. They have the number 1 pick and the number 9 pick. So they got some power there to pull in some assets, or just say, we're going to take, the best quarterback out there if we feel, he's better than what we have. And we know how that works. You see a player like Fields who has shown some really good stuff, but has turned the ball over a lot. So you kind of see where he is to that P word, the potential, of a Caleb Williams or a Drake May, the two, that's those two and then everybody else, that you say, we have to see what that potential is like, because what you don't want to do is be the guys that say, we're not going to pick him, and they go to another team and they CJ Stroud it, and they play great, and you're, oh God, we could have had that, and they didn't get it. Sometimes GMs or ownership of teams just can't help themselves and say, if this guy is as highly rated as everybody thinks and as highly rated as we think, we can't pass him up.
Well, I think it's certainly potential as a part of that, but I think it's also resetting the timeline a bit, because with Justin, they're going to be coming up on money decisions soon with him after this next season. And Dad, it's a guy that you mentioned, another coordinator in his ear, a guy who we saw finally, I think, make some progress in areas that people wanted, but still holds on to the ball too long, still takes too many sacks in a lot of these cases, even as I think their offensive line has improved personnel-wise, time under task together. And some of it is just the stuff that, that development's going to be a little stunted, and you can hold Justin accountable for part of that, but part of that also is, hey, the amount of changing coaching around a young player helps set that foundation, and you wonder if you keep waiting around for the Justin Fields that you drafted as highly as you did under the prior administration, if that's going to keep expecting different things as you keep churning around him, or if it makes more sense to say, hey, we understand this is partially on us as the Chicago Bears. Justin Fields is going to be somebody's starter next year. He played well enough to do that, there's no doubt. But if you're Chicago, you're not just expecting him to be your starter. You're expecting him to be your franchise savior. No, you're not taking a chance or a flyer on this dude. It's about him being your future. And if you're confident that he is able to do that, or you believe you need to make a change in that spot, but like I said yesterday, you're in a spot where it is really difficult. You've got to thread a very narrow passageway for success here, because if you bring on a new quarterback, now all of a sudden you reset that clock, but it's with Matt Eberflus, who walks into this season fresh off having to fire a coordinator and probably being the next guy up that would get fired if things went poorly there, or you stick with Justin Fields, who's going to deal with that different voice. Either way, it's a very, very rocky foundation going into this.
It's going to be interesting of where this goes. I think they're going to reset. I think they're going to reset.
I do too.
With a Caleb Williams. And in all honesty, I look forward to seeing where Justin Fields ends up. People are putting him in Atlanta. How about if you're not going to bring back Russell Wilson, how about Denver? Is that somebody Sean Payton would like to work with? I don't know, but he is going to be somewhere, and no matter where he goes, Justin Fields is going to be with another new offensive coordinator for his career. Yeah. It's one of those things where it just happens to some new quarterbacks more than others. But he will be somewhere. You are right, and I do think Chicago resets, because there is something to resetting with the money, but also to your point, and I know we've talked about this. If you reset with a new quarterback and things, the season doesn't go well, which a lot of times is the expectation, though people get blinded by the C.J. Stroud-Houston thing, then Eberflus is probably going to lose his job, and then you're kind of starting over again there with a new quarterback.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's been this never-ending cycle of this inability to get the general manager, the coach, and the quarterback on the same page in Chicago. It feels like season in and season out, year in and year out.
Well, and that's the difficult part here is it would have made sense structurally for Chicago to move on from Matt Eberflus for that reason. Yes. You've got this incredibly rich pool of talented coaches that are in the hiring cycle right now. Much like we talk about opportunity cost for the quarterbacks at the top of this draft, there is some of that for the coaches available where you would have gotten a quality candidate, especially if the Bears' job had come open with all that capital, with what they've got potentially at quarterback and the foundation set by Matt Eberflus. That, I have to imagine, would have been one of the most appealing jobs in football and would have gotten you on the right timeline. And leadership requires risks. And if Ryan Poles believes Matt Eberflus is the guy, then you do whatever you have to keep him around. Speaking of guys we want to keep around, coming up next, Steve Avila, offensive guard for the Rams, going to join us and talk about their game this weekend. Next.
appreciate the time. Still playing ball. It's a beautiful thing. Well, you're used to it from, going on in the playoffs and everything.
Yeah, for sure, man. A lot of people ask me, like, how I feel. I mean, I kind of feel the same, like, in terms of my body and stuff. I mean, because I feel like we were going this long last year. So, I feel great.
I was going to say, do you see yourself as the common denominator here? Because you look, TCU last year goes to the playoff and the title. This year they don't. The Rams last year missed the postseason. This year they make it. Have you accepted your powers, and are you ready to use them responsibly?
I will accept them. I will accept it when we get to the Super Bowl and not do what we did last year in the championship.
So I'm going to say this to you, Steve, that there's 3 people on this Zoom right now. 2 people have been to a championship game, you and my son Mike, and they got rolled by Alabama in 2013. I mean, rolled bad, like you guys got rolled bad. You know what? But I at Notre Dame, I never went to a title game, and in 9 years in the NFL, I never went to the Super Bowl. So I'm envious of you two. I don't care what happens. You got there. You can't win a championship without being in the championship game. So. Man, it doesn't matter. If you got smoked there, so what? You were there. That's the way I look at it, coming from a guy who was never there.
Yeah. I mean, I take, everything, with a grain of salt. I mean, I feel like we could have performed better, but also just being there is just such an experience, to say that we came from a team that was 5-7 and we ended up going to the championship. So that definitely holds a special place in my heart, just seeing, everything that we went through. So, yeah.
It was an incredible season. It's been an incredible season for you. You're the only Rams player on this team, offense or defense, to start every snap of this season. And you've done so as a rookie. So what's this transition been like for you, man, coming into the NFL, which I'm sure was a dream, but then immediately making the impact you have?
Yeah, I mean, I had to go in with the mindset of, you're the guy to start. And that definitely was a little nerve-wracking. Because maybe a year and a half ago, I couldn't even imagine. So, I knew the expectations coming in, and, I just tried to be a sponge as much as I could, just take in coaching when I could. The big difference about, the NFL and college is, everybody here is good. They're all here for a reason. And you have to know that you're going to lose. And that's what the toughest thing for me was. Because I beat myself up, man. I don't like to look at myself in the mirror at night and just lie to myself. So I remember the first couple of practices, I'm like, dude, I suck.
Were those Aaron Donald related instances there?
No, that was what the problem was, is that it wasn't him. So, no, but I mean, it just goes to show, how good the competition is, in the NFL. But, you take those losses and you learn from them. And I feel like that's what we all have done. Me and, all the other rookies and the players, that helped this team get to where we are.
You guys on the offensive line have been a big part of the story of the resurgence of this Rams team this year. And people describing the Rams as physical and downhill didn't happen a lot before you got there. So I'm curious, you didn't have any association with what went on before, but when you guys started this season, when you're in OTAs and in camp, how much was that a directive from Sean McVay and the rest of the staff that they wanted this to be the identity of the team?
That definitely was one of the major. And it's funny because I can recall, he specifically came in and he was like, "We are going to change the identity, of our offense and what we do, specifically offensive line. We're going to try to run the ball down their throat." And I feel like the first telling of that was, I guess, drafting me. I felt like they did their research and looked at, what I did in college. And I feel like they're utilizing me, to the best of my ability. And that's all you can ask for, from a player. And I'm glad that, I'm surrounded by coaches who bring out the best in me.
So you guys get traveling to Detroit for this playoff game. So take people, again, who can never be there down into the locker room or onto the field during the week, your preparation. How do you prepare individually for the matchups you're going to have or when you're going to face a new team like this you haven't played this year?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing the most you probably can do is just watch film. You just got to study how guys, do things and how what they struggle against and what they excel against. That's definitely a key thing that we focus on. And I feel like our coaches do a good job of breaking things down. We have a bunch of meetings and we have, a bunch of coaches who know what they're talking about, specifically in the O-line room, and players, man, who've played a lot of ball that just help out
with the technicals of how this person plays. And I feel like that honestly prepares us the most. It best prepares us for the game. So, I take in a lot of those things that we learn through the week and, go out there in the game. And, it's definitely a lot easier, when you do things like that.
Who are the players that have helped you the most when you reference something like that?
Yeah, Brian Allen, who's played a lot of ball, Coleman Shelton, who knows a lot of ball, he's played a lot of ball, and Rob Havenstein, who's played a lot of ball. So those three, I feel like are just the masterminds, in the offensive line room. I'm telling you, man, they've helped me out so much. When you talk about being a sponge, that's all I've tried to be. Especially now, like even now, man, I'm still learning stuff, and I try to improve on something at least, one time a week. So yeah.
So you obviously have some size to you. It listed at 332. I don't know what the actual weight is, but you're a large human being. So when you play, would you rather play against another large human being, 330, 340, 350, who doesn't move as well as, or a 285-pound really quick dude?
Yeah. There's pros and cons to both. I wouldn't say I'd specifically prefer one or the other. I do feel like one of my strengths is I am a big body, but I also move quickly. So when I do match up against those bigger bodies, I have the advantage of being, quicker than them. So that definitely helps me out, and especially going against the power. I can sit down and anchor on those. Going against a quicker guy, in the run game, that's where you got to make your money at when you're going against a guy who just doesn't weigh as much. They can be a little bit more of a hassle in the pass game, but again, when you watch the film and you see what you need to do, those are the things that all comes together. It's like a puzzle. So, after the game, you can really analyze like, hey, did I do enough to prepare for this guy, and what didn't I do so I can, prepare better next time.
So with a number of rookies starting, but everybody still has their own timeline of this. When did you feel comfortable? Like this is where I should be.
Yeah. Oh man. I would say it took maybe 4 or 5 games. Because dude, another thing too, man, just growing up, you hear about these names. Just the big names. Aaron Donald is starting with number 1, and you're just like, oh my God, like I'm about to go against this guy. But there was a bunch of jitters going into the first few games. It really didn't affect how I played. It was just more of like a mental thing. I remember a lot of people have like a welcome to the NFL moment. I didn't really have one, but it was more of just we were playing in Seattle, and they were doing introductions, and Bobby Wagner came back to Seattle, and I was like, oh my God, they called his name, and it just got so loud. But that sets the tone, It's like, oh my God, it's Bobby Wagner. True. Yeah, so when you're going against a guy like that, when he was lined up in front of me, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm about to block him. And those are the things that you think about.
I think it's another thing that doesn't change from college to pro. One thing, the further away you are from the ball, the more people talk. Right? I bet you don't talk a lot of smack, and a lot of too many D linemen talk a lot of smack.
It's funny because like those first few games, it was more of just like do my job, like don't mess up. And then I got more comfortable, and it's pretty fun. You get to say a little thing here or there, and a lot of guys, you see a lot of personality out there, but that there's some guys who just have a switch that they turn on. They're just and it's just like calm down.
You don't have to name names if you don't want, but is there a guy you encountered this year who either talked the most smack or the best smack of anybody that
when we played the Eagles first going in, the first thing that I heard when we were watching them is like, this is the first thing. They're like, Brandon Graham is going to talk so much crap. Yeah. And that's just who the type of player he is. And no respect to him. And that's just all I heard the whole game. And I was like, bro, is this dude going to shut up? It's just, but, I'm sure that gets him pumped up. But just seeing personalities like that, that's how it goes in the NFL.
No, it is. It's definitely a lot of big personalities. He's a well-known one. And we'd imagine you're going to be a very, very well-known one as time keeps going along here. The way you're playing, man. So, Steve, we can't thank you enough for all the time. Best of luck this weekend. We're excited to watch you guys play, man.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you guys, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Steve.
Time to break some news here on GoJo and Golic. That's right, baby. Buckle up. The New England Patriots embarking on a new era with Jerod Mayo as the head coach. Adam Schefter reporting the Pats have hired Mayo to be the replacement for Bill Belichick, who mutually agreed to part ways with the team just yesterday. So Robert Kraft here, GoJo, wanted to move fast on a hire. He did so by hiring the number one in-house option in Mayo, who reportedly was already part of a succession plan to eventually replace the greatest coach of all time.
Yeah, Dad, I saw Ian Rappaport had been reporting this yesterday, that the Patriots and Jerod Mayo had a succession plan almost contractually built into this that they had communicated with the NFL. Going back, because remember, last January, he signed an extension that would keep him around for years. Bill Belichick has 1 year left on his current deal, so a lot of people looked at a guy who was, I think, going to start to be more and more of a candidate bannered about in these hiring cycles, signing that kind of long-term deal that even supersedes the head coach as, all right, there might be something afoot here. And so now we see the fruits of that plan coming to fruition for the New England Patriots as Jerod Mayo supersedes now Sean McVay and becomes the youngest head coach in the NFL, and a guy who has spent his entire football life in New England.
Yeah, that's what's going to be interesting. I've always talked about when you Google a coach, you look at all the stops that they made. You know, right now, Jerod Mayo, he was a first-round pick in 2008, played with New England from 2008 to 15, and then didn't get with the Patriots as a coach until 2019, and now he'll be the head coach. So for at least the foreseeable future, that's the only team that he's going to be a part of. And, you know, you can tell certain players if it's a route they want to go, if they kind of have that in them. And he's always been that first in, last out guy. He's a film junkie, especially even in the offseason when nobody's around. He's in watching film all the time. You talk about the great draft day. He was the 10th pick overall in that draft in the first round, and he was a guy who was raking leaves on draft day when he wasn't in New York. He was staying home by his parents and raking leaves and such. So he kind of had that tendency of that hard worker if this is a route he wanted to go down. What'll be interesting is the staff. Does he keep Bill O'Brien on as the offensive coordinator? Remember, Belichick has 2 kids on that staff. And, oh, by the way, Jerod Mayo's brother, Duran, is the assistant strength and conditioning coach. And he was actually hired there in 18, a year before Jerod Mayo got there. Now, Duran was a linebacker for the Calgary Stampeders. He played in the CFL. But, yeah, he's been actually with New England a year longer than Jerod has. So I'd imagine he's going to be hanging around. But it'll be interesting and I don't mean that in a nepotism way. I mean that in, you know, I doubt his brother's going to let him go. Let me just put it that way. Maybe it isn't
some real succession
deal.
Stuff in there if he decided to come in and make his first order of business to just sit his brother down.
Wait, does he keep Belichick's kids on the staff?
I don't know. That's the thing. The rest of the staff, now what you normally do is you interview those coaches. Some may want to leave. Some may want to go, you know, and may want to start somewhere else. Who knows? But you interview them, or at least guys he already may have in mind that he's going to release some, because as even new head coaches, and he's now the youngest head coach, Mike, as you said, what they all have is a list, right? They all have, because they're preparing for this. As you mentioned, he even had it written into his contract. So he has a list of assistants that he would like. You know, every guy that's going to be a head coach has that. So there are going to be guys on the staff, without question, I think, that are going to be gone. How many? We have no idea. And also, Jerod Mayo, it's not like he's been coaching that long where maybe that list is that deep at this point, but I'm certain he has some ideas.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, most of everyone's going to look at the situation. You mentioned Bill O'Brien and wonder how in good conscience you bring him back, given that the offense was the massive failing of this season, because the Patriots defense, even weathering the storm of so many of the injuries to some of their best pass rushers, certainly Christian Gonzalez, their rookie first-round pick out of Oregon, still managed to be an incredibly compelling unit for much of the season. And so you look at the influence there, and I know people are, I think I've seen people point to already, Jerod Mayo's never even called defensive plays. That doesn't matter when it comes to being the head coach of the football team. You're there to display, manage men. You're there to manage the entire operation. And it does sound like everyone involved, you're right, from the time he was a player has identified this. Every player that you've heard talk about being teammates with Jerod Mayo has kind of indicated that he's always had this about him. And so identifying those leadership capabilities and nurturing, that's far more important to me than did the guy actually have to go out there and XO thing and call plays during the game.
So with New England, at this point, I think they have the 3rd pick in the draft, and you figure those 2 quarterbacks are going 1-2. Do you draft a quarterback? Is Jaden Daniels a guy there? Do you trade for Justin Fields? Is that a guy that you think about trading for and using a quarterback? Because that's, as with every team, is going to be the most important decision and position. And we know nobody on the roster there for the Patriots is the quarterback of the future there. So they have to go a different route there. But that's what you do with a young first-time head coach, is sometimes you have to start over. Now, whether you're starting over with a rookie or a guy that's been in the league a couple of years like Justin Fields, we'll see. But as you mentioned, it's in his contract. Let's not waste time. The press conference is next week. We hit the ground running. That's what you have to do in the offseason, because that's the first thing Bill Belichick always says is, we're behind. Whenever they win the Super Bowl, after he says, yay, he says, now we're behind everybody else and we got to get back to work.
How do you think Bill felt about that? If they knew that was written into Jerod Mayo's contract. Like, obviously, he's a guy that Bill was a part of drafting. He was a guy that Bill knew well enough and thought enough of as a player to bring on as a coach in that way. But it's a little bit different when all of a sudden now you can basically see the right. And maybe he had a hand in that. Maybe he understood that and had handpicked his successor. But we do know, again, going back to the central thesis, that Bill Belichick, at least the way he indicated, still wanted to coach here, and then it was framed as the mutual parting of ways. I wonder how he did feel about that.
Yeah, it is interesting because there's no timetable to it. You just have it written into your contract. It could be 10 years down the road. But in this case, you're right. The word mutual isn't mutual. Bill wanted to keep coaching, and they were ready to move on. And it doesn't shock me. A lot of times you go opposite of what you had, a defensive coach to an offensive coach. Here, a coach who's been around forever to the youngest head coach ever. I mean, you almost can't 180 it more than this, right? But at least he has some of that Patriot or Belichick way about him. So that, to me, will be interesting because, it's turning into linebacker U for head coaches between DeMeco Ryans, Antonio Pierce, if he keeps the job in Vegas. Now, Jerod Mayo, and you're right, Mike, it's about dealing with players and how well Antonio Pierce has dealt with players. And you hear the same thing with Jerod Mayo and dealing with players. And it's just a different era of players now, and these guys are closer to that, to dealing with players of that age.
Well, you think about, too, just the natural leadership that comes with that position. Like, I understand it's not to a man, but you think of linebacker as the quarterback of the defense. We always hear it stated that way, and so you've got to be one of those guys, whether it's as the communicator, if you're the green dot player who's getting the calls from the sideline, or just in general, that's sort of the role a lot of these guys can fall into, and so you can kind of understand why maybe that position defensively would track to this spot. Interesting note from Diana Rossini, our good friend and senior NFL reporter over at The Athletic, said the New England Patriots never reached out to a single person, including hot names like Jim Harbaugh, Mike Vrabel, or even Ben Johnson, per sources. They made their decision less than a day after firing Bill Belichick with a plan in place.
But if it was written into his contract, there is no choice, right? I mean, if it's written into the contract that you're the next head coach, I guess this would seem normal that, okay, it's in his contract, he's the next head coach. We're not dilly-dallying around with this or bringing in anybody else to interview because we don't have to, and this is what we have as the next coach.
I think what
the other potentially interesting thing here is also now the GM position here, because normally you've got the GM in place before you hire the coach. The Patriots are a place that haven't had to hire a true GM in quite some time because Bill Belichick has always had final control of this roster. I know Elliot Wolf, a guy internally, their director of scouting, is someone whose name's been bantered around. Dad, you'd have to imagine, given the way they did this, an internal candidate has to be highly likely considering the order of how this has gone.
Yep, I agree. I think they do keep it all in-house and just try and keep it running. And while it's not running well, it needs to see the mechanic for sure to get repairs. I think it is going to stay in-house and the trust there in-house and just the next moves that are made. So, a sharp eye will be kept on Jerod Mayo now, especially starting with the staff, and then when they get together with who is going to be the pick.
All right, we have finally reached the NFL playoffs, right, gentlemen? And what better way to break it all down than with the Golic acrostic? And as always, with this week's acrostic comes a poem, or a broem, should I say. G is for the rookie up against the grizzled vet. O is for freezing temps, making the Chiefs a good bet. L is a QB's name and what a coach feels for his old city. I is for a potential ending for Philly that isn't pretty. C is for the Bills entering the playoffs. Wicked hot. Now let's get your two dudes super wild card weekend thoughts, starting with G. GoJo. Go ahead, Smooch.
Yeah, Dad, this one, the game that kicks off the weekend and the matchup that is probably one of the hardest to call in the Browns against the Houston Texans here. The Texans are a 2-point home dog against a Cleveland team that comes in a little banged up right now. They already announced their kicker Dustin Hopkins was going to be out. Safety Grant Delpit was going to be out. And Denzel Ward popped up on the injury report with a knee injury sustained in practice on Thursday. So obviously worrisome there, Dad, for a Browns defense that struggled a little bit down the back half of the season, as we've seen Myles Garrett dealing with a shoulder injury for a lot of the year here. Do you think Joe Flacco can keep up what has been an absolute tear and lift the Cleveland Browns to the next round of the playoffs?
Well, I think he can, because one thing I don't see in this game, Mike, is somebody blowing out to 35 points, right, and getting a huge lead on the other team. I don't know if either one of these teams will do that, because Cleveland still likes to run the ball. The best friend of Joe Flacco coming in, they're always with a different quarterback. Who benefits from that? It's been David Njoku, right? He has had a monster year this year. I still like their running game, and we love their defense. And while the Texans have been fantastic this year, neither one of these teams is a hold on to your hat. They're going to score at will. So I still think it's going to be a close game. For as far as Stroud, he relies on Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz. Those are the two main guys he's really hitting on. Robert Woods occasionally there, with Tank Dell still obviously on the shelf. So I'm actually leaning toward, of all the sides of the ball in this from each team, I still think it's the Browns defense that stands head and shoulders above. So I am going to go with the Browns on the road in this one in Houston.
Yeah, I would agree. I would probably lean Cleveland's way. I heard Mina Kimes talk about this yesterday. The Houston Texans defense, one of the worst in facing play-action pass, and we know the Cleveland Browns, especially with Joe Flacco under center, Kevin Stefanski has dialed up a lot of that. We've seen it give way to the huge plays, like you mentioned, to David Njoku, to Amari Cooper in that passing attack, despite having an offensive line that's been banged up and marred by injury, but play-action pass, a great way to help that group out in front. And so for Houston, you've also got Will Anderson Jr. and Jonathan Greenard both showing up on the injury report too, have been banged up down the back half of the season. So I think all those things factored together, because on the other side, Dad, C.J. Stroud's been sensational. And even as they lost Tank Dell and that wide receiver room got beat up, we've seen him come back. And while maybe the second half of the season wasn't as perfect as the first, or as electrifying as the first, he's been a guy that you've got a ton of confidence in, despite the fact that he's just a rookie going up against Joe Flacco, who's been here and done that. And I said his playing was sort of the bleep you attitude that comes with being a former Super Bowl winner and a guy who's accomplished in this league, who also didn't need this job. So I think all of that does come together and ultimately gives the Cleveland Browns a win in this spot. So that's going to be the start to the weekend here. Emerson, you also mentioned a matchup between, and we talked about this with Clay Matthews the other day, former Green Bay Packers head coach Mike McCarthy and the Dallas Cowboys taking on the current Green Bay Packers and the next successor to the quarterback dynasty there in Jordan Love, who's been red hot.
Yeah, everyone knows the storylines galore, right, this weekend. And Mike McCarthy playing his former team, taking on his former team. A lot of pressure on him because he has not been super fantastic in the postseason.
Last year, I thought it was important for me to talk about, Green Bay in the beginning of the week. I did with the team. I regretted it. I don't think that doesn't even need to come into our energy base. So you live and learn. This game's about our commitment. It doesn't matter who we're playing. It really doesn't. I mean, I had no stake. I didn't watch one game prior to yesterday's contest in preparation. So just started last night on the plane, and that's where I am, and I think that's clearly where our team is. Our team, it's just no time for that.
Listen, English wasn't our strength, so yeah, sure.
Man,
we skipped O, went straight to L, so we're taking the L on that.
We didn't skip O. I skipped O. I didn't know my own last name and couldn't read the document. No, and listen, I understand you're a team player. I'm also going to pull the thumb here and understand that one, that we just went right past that and went out of the easy order of the games that all this was in. Dad, that being said, we'll get back to the cold game that's coming up.
Golic.
And we'll stick.
That's what we're doing. We're doing Golic instead of Golic.
Exactly. So we've got Jordan Love and the Packers, Dad, heading in to take on Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys, who thankfully for the Cowboys, Dad, and the reason I picked them in this game, they're 7-point favorites, is they're at home. And while home road splits are, again, not the thing that I most ascribe to, it's been hard to ignore with the Dallas Cowboys how big of a difference this has been for them. Getting healthy at the right time, Zach Martin, Tyler Smith, and Stephon Gilmore were all out at practice the other day. And that offense that, has struggled to run the ball for the majority of the season, I would imagine is just going to do what they've been doing in the games that they've been successful down the stretch and just try and see how many times they can get the ball into CeeDee Lamb's hands in the short area of the field and let him cook.
Yeah, I mean, that Green Bay defense has been better against the pass than against the run. They've been getting run on a little bit. And Dallas, you're right. I mean, at home, and I can't pick this game since I'm calling this game. Dallas has been such money at home. They're number one in so many categories, from yards to scoring, when they're at home. So they're in the confines of home right now. But Jordan Love, listen, the last 8 regular season games, 18 touchdowns, 1 interception. I mean, that's the key. And we keep saying for young quarterbacks, he's been in the league a while, but it's his first year as a starter, and he's been money. I mean, in some of the lists that he's been on, right now for this year is third NFL quarterback with 4,000 yards passing, 32 touchdowns in a first year with multiple games started. That's Kurt Warner and Patrick Mahomes. I mean, and he's on some really, really good lists of how well he's done. And it started out a little cold, but it's really been hot as of late. You got the two-headed monster of A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones back. Dillon been nicked up a little bit for the year, but when they're both out there, but A.J. Jones has been having, as of late, running the ball well. It's going to fall on this Green Bay defense. As I said, not as good against the run. Does that set up Pollard for some success here? We'll see how they play against the pass. But just big numbers out of Dallas when they're at home. I mean, big numbers out of Dak, big numbers out of CeeDee Lamb has had, outside of Tyreek Hill, they've been trading off between CeeDee Lamb is number 1 in receptions, Tyreek Hill number 1 in receiving yards. It's ridiculous how well they have been doing. But, I think the underlying theme here is Dallas' success at home.
Yeah, well, and I think you mentioned it's weakness on weakness, the Dallas rushing offense against the rushing defense for the Green Bay Packers, the strength on strength, passing attack versus passing attack. But the other side, Dad, I feel like with the Cowboys, especially in this iteration the last few years, it's always been, hey, is the rush defense going to hold up enough to keep you out of trouble? Because when they've gotten beat bad, see the game at Orchard Park against the Bills and a number of other spots there, it's been teams that have been able to run right up the middle on them because for all the great parts on that defense, they are much more built to get you in bad downs and distances and try and get after the passer with Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and the rest of that group. But they can get run on a ton. And this Green Bay Packers offense had kind of moved around a lot of pieces on the offensive line for most of the season, has settled on a group that I think now they have confidence in to go out and try and get that done. So I picked the Cowboys in this one. I know you can't pick the Cowboys because you're calling this game, but I think it still has a chance to be pretty close because if Jordan Love continues to play the way that he's been playing, he can keep them in any game as this young group around him has really come into their own. All right, because spelling is hard, we're going to backtrack, throw it in reverse for Thirst. Dad mentioned cold Emerson. We are expecting ungodly amounts of cold in Kansas City.
Yeah. So when the Chiefs host the Dolphins here, the expected temperature around kickoff is going to be 3 degrees with a wind chill approaching minus 30. So if that projection holds up, this will become the coldest game that the Dolphins have ever played in, right? Which is not great news for them, considering they've lost 10 straight when the kickoff temperature is 40 degrees or below. Here's what Mike McDaniel has to say about the chilly forecast.
When you're playing football in colder weather than you'd hang out in, then it can be one of two things. It can be an excuse, or it can be something that galvanizes a team because you're going through it together. The air conditioning gets in that huge space, gets down to 50 or so. I'm not even going to really. I think that's kind of insulting to the weather at this point to be like, oh, yeah, we're ready. You know, the bottom line is you have to have a collective mindset. Everyone has to be all in.
It's gonna be tough to emulate -30 inside that practice space.
Yeah, I mean, and for anybody, even the Kansas City players that are used to cold, that's a different level of cold right there. Dad, to say it wouldn't affect the Dolphins would be a farce. I've always told the story from playing Miami, the college team in the Sun Bowl, but a team that's used to practicing in South Beach, how thrown off they were in the tunnel before that game when it was 32 and snowing there, which was a slow Tuesday to us and a nightmare for them, and we saw they were mentally very affected before it even got started. The stat about the record in games under 40 degrees, to me, is more indicative of the time of year you're playing in those games. You're playing in postseason football usually when the temperature is like that, or late season division football, so it's going to be pretty tough. That being said, this Dolphins team is also just massively overwhelmed by injury at this point, and I think at a huge disadvantage because of that.
Yeah, as you mentioned, winless is 17 in games under 40 degrees. Tua is 0-4 when it's under 45 degrees. It's going to affect them, but it's going to affect Kansas City as well. It's not like even if you're a cold weather team, you're used to 0 degrees and wind. You're just not. Now, one of the differences is Miami is run like a Ferrari, right? And you don't see many Ferraris driving well in bad weather. It's difficult. But again, the offense knows where it's going. So you're going to wait for that big play one way or the other. The one thing that I think is in good shape for Miami is their backfield is full again with Mostert coming back. He had over 1,000 yards. Achane has been phenomenal. And even when they throw Jeff Wilson in there, he's been doing well. Both those two guys I mentioned off the top can catch balls as well. And Kansas City's been kind of middle of the pack against the run. So that's what I see out of Miami. Because of the weather, you're going to try and run the ball. If you run the ball with a little bit of success, you can play action to that short pass, right? Get the ball in the hands of Waddle, get the ball in the hands of Tyreek Hill, and see what they can do after the catch, especially if a defender slips, though they may slip as well. Where this can help Kansas City is who's your best friend a lot of times in bad weather. It's a tight end. And you have obviously one of the best in the game in Travis Kelce to be able to be that big body to catch that ball in bad weather for Mahomes, either from the pocket or when he has to escape. Make no mistake, the weather will affect both teams, not just Miami, because nobody, I repeat, nobody is used to playing in 0 degrees or can practice and be ready for 0 degrees.
No, but I do think for a bunch of guys that are injured coming off this, it heightens the awareness of all that stuff. It's a lot harder to get those things warmer and feeling good. And so you're right, for Mostert, who's going to be relied on, for Jalen Waddle, if he's back, who's going to be relied on. That's difficult. And for the Chiefs on the other side, Dad, I think some forgiveness in a matchup that would have been tough for them. They get Donovan Smith back, who's missed the last 5 games with a stinger in his neck. Wanya Morris, who had been his backup, is out with a concussion, so depth an issue there, but you're going up against a Miami Dolphins team that's so depleted on the edge. They had to sign Justin Houston this past week, and so I just don't think the Dolphins are going to be able to get the pressure that other teams have been able to against the Chiefs in that matchup to get this done. I think Kansas City wins this game. I think they move back on and keep this thing going. Let's now, because we're back on track, get to is this the end? The Philadelphia Eagles, Emerson, in a real tough bind coming off a real lackluster end to their regular season.
Dude, they've lost 5 of their past 6 games. They have a -8 turnover ratio in that stretch. The Bucs have won 5 of their past 6. They've got a +4 turnover ratio. Philly knocked off the Bucs back in week 3. So here is Bucs head coach Todd Bowles on how preparing for this week's game compares to their matchup earlier in the season versus the Eagles.
I don't think it compares at all. It's about the same for the really most part. It doesn't compare because we played them so early in the year. We were still growing. I'm sure they were still growing. And, playoff time is different. It's one and done. Everybody's nicked up. Everybody's hurt. It's just a matter of who makes the most mistakes.
Yeah, GoJo, a lot of people think Eagles are the team on upset alert. No other team is on a bigger upset alert than Philadelphia this weekend because of their garbage play recently.
Yeah, I mean, because of that and because of all the injury, Dad. Yeah. Now you added after the last game, Sidney Brown and that secondary loss to an ACL injury. Jalen Hurts was coming out and talking about how he probably shouldn't have gone back into the game with the finger injury that he sustained. You had A.J. Brown go down there. I think they're too banged up to party, Dad. They're 3-point favorites on the road. I feel like that 3 points is enough for me with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think this game has the ultimate variance potential because Tampa Bay's obviously been a bit of a roller coaster this year. Baker Mayfield himself's banged up, but I can't trust this Eagles team based on how they've played and based on who's available.
Yeah, I'm still going to go with Philly in this game. Tampa Bay can't run the ball for anything. And so they're going to have to throw the ball. But then again, Philly is second worst in the league against the pass. That we know between play and injuries how they struggled, especially in the middle field, against the pass. So it'll be interesting where Tampa Bay and how they attack. But I still think, as we talked about earlier, frustration. Got to be a lot of frustration there, but I still think it's a team that can play well enough to win this game and move on to the next round. So I'm going to go with Philly on the road.
Yeah, God, I think they ultimately win, but man, I don't know even beyond that. I mean, we always said whoever got the NFC South winner was kind of getting a walk in the park, but with this Philadelphia team right now, I don't know what they have to hang their hat on at this point. Maybe it'll click in. Like you said, it's a very resilient, veteran-led team, especially in the trenches where it matters. But defensively, if we see Baker Mayfield get hot, and Lord knows he's capable, all hell can break loose. The last one, Dad, see Buffalo charging in to the playoffs there on a hot streak. We know they were dead in the water at the middle of the season. They found their way back in, and now they're 7-point favorites at home against the Pittsburgh Steelers team that's not going to have T.J. Watt on defense. And that, to me, Dad, was the nail in the coffin. They were already at a disadvantage, but I really feel like once that news came out, your best punch was gone, and now it could be a really long afternoon there.
Yeah, the line moved to 9.5, by the way. So I just don't see Pittsburgh. I mean, the best player on the field. I mean, both teams, right? Would you agree? T.J. Watt. I put him, it's Josh Allen we talk about, but T.J. Watt, to me, is the best player. Would have been the best player on the field for both teams, and he is not going to be there. That's a huge miss for Pittsburgh. Still dealing with a backup quarterback, Mason Rudolph, even though he's been getting wins. I just think this is a tall task for a Buffalo team that I just called last week against Miami, and they played better than Miami and won it, but they kept shooting themselves in the foot. They went on a run with wins, beating the Chiefs and the Cowboys in back-to-back weeks. Earlier they had lost to Philadelphia. Yeah, I just think Buffalo is still too strong here. They've had an O-line that's been together a lot this year, and that helps them. And Pittsburgh just too banged up, and when the best player is out, makes it very, very difficult. So I go with Buffalo here. 9.5's a lot, though. 9.5 is a lot.
Against Mike Tomlin, who, listen, once again has done the impossible and maximized this team and gotten a team now quarterbacked by Mason Rudolph into the bleeping playoffs. But you mentioned the attrition there. I think about the video from earlier in the season, Dad, of Cam Hayward having to lead the young linebacker core that was all new and green in there. Buffalo, the way they structured their entire offseason was they wanted to do more in the middle of the field. They draft Dalton Kincaid. Dawson Knox missed a practice with illness, but has been back out there. So you'd imagine between them and James Cook, they're going to try and make this a very long day for the middle of the field for the Pittsburgh Steelers defense that won't be able to get the same pressure that they're used to without T.J. Watt. We will get to the Detroit Lions game, one of the juicier matchups with Matthew Stafford making his return to the Motor City for the first time since that trade went down. Obviously, Jared Goff and a lot of the feelings around his departure in Los Angeles had been talked about a ton recently. Sean McVay has addressed it and said he could have done better at the end of all that. But coming up next, if we're talking about Buffalo, let's get a former Buffalo Bill in here. Lorenzo Alexander, all-around great linebacker, formerly for the Bills, going to join us next.
All right, big question coming up this weekend. Can the Bills keep it rolling against the Steelers? We kind of just broke down the game a little bit. And if you're a little superstitious here, so these two teams have met in the postseason before, 3 times actually. The winner in each of the previous 3 playoff meetings advanced to the Super Bowl. No one better to talk this game than a former Bills player himself, Lorenzo Alexander, former NFL linebacker, played 15 NFL seasons, 2 Pro Bowls, second-team All-Pro selection. He is joining the guys right now. Take it away, GoJo.
Well, I mean, what a perfect day to have a former linebacker on here. And Lorenzo, we appreciate the time as we got the news inside your old division that Jerod Mayo is going to be taking over for the Patriots at the head coach. We had D'Amico Ryans last offseason, Antonio Pierce. Yep. How much are you enjoying watching all these linebackers finally get the respect they're deserved as head coaching candidates?
It's making me second guess should I jump back into coaching or not. I'm coaching my kids right now, but hey, who wouldn't want to coach on the NFL level? And then obviously these guys are on a fast track as far as being able to be a head coach. But it's extremely exciting to watch these men get opportunities. Right, I played against several of these guys, and you know what type of guys they were on the field, how smart they were, intelligent they were, but more importantly, the great leaders and how relatable they are to a lot of these young men. That you get guys to be able to run through that wall that we always talk about getting the team to do, and they're doing a great job of doing that in all aspects of the teams and the organizations they've been a part of.
It is interesting you mentioned about coaching because your career and the way you played and your leadership skills, a lot of people thought could lead you to coaching. Now, you mentioned, when we were talking before we came on air, you're coaching your kids. And the one thing about coaching in the NFL, you miss a lot of time. So there's that of, do I want to go do that at the top level NFL? You love coaching your kids now. Is there a thought at some point? I know you're 40 years old. You're still quite young enough to maybe start going up the ranks in coaching?
Yeah, well, I had an opportunity with the Bills. Sean McDermott asked me if I wanted to be a part of the staff. And to your point, right, family was more important. After playing 15 years, you remember all the times and the important moments that you missed. And so I really wanted to spend the next, I got my youngest is 9, so really the next 8 to 10 years cultivating my kids and pouring into them and being in their life, coaching them up, right? That's the most important coaching job you'll ever have. And then hopefully, as time goes on, I may have another opportunity. I know when you get far away from the league, sometimes you miss those things, but there's a lot of great relationships that I was able to maintain, and hopefully be able to jump back into it whenever that is. But I'm still around different organizations in different ways, keeping my name out there.
I have no doubt at some point, if that's the path that you choose, someone will be much better for having you around there. And with the new job that we talked about there, we also had some coaches ushered out here. Pete Carroll out after his long tenure with the Seahawks. Bill Belichick, a coach you're very familiar with inside the AFC East, out after that long tenure. What do you think of when you think of Bill Belichick and the legacy he now leaves behind in New England?
I mean, greatness. And the one thing that I always loved about Bill, he had a lot of respect for the game and the players that he competed against. He didn't say a ton in the media, but when you saw him after the game, he would let you know what he thought of you as a player. So that was always really cool. And then from a player's perspective, it was never about his ego, right? It was always about how can we win this game and how can I put my players in the best position to go out there and execute at their highest level. And so he was always showing a multitude of different schemes, putting players in different positions, and really allowing them to go out and be the best version of themselves on Sundays. And so those two things really stand out to me as a man, as a coach, as far as what I want to instill when I'm coaching my team as well.
And certainly, and that's why he's going to go down as the greatest ever to do it. But he's also a guy, Lorenzo, that wants to keep coaching. He's 71 years old. There's 8 openings as we speak right now. It will be interesting. What do you think with like ownership and now what we're seeing? D'Amico Ryans, young coach. Jerod Mayo, young coach. If you have the choice out there, do you go with that guy who's done it forever and the greatest, or do you start skewing a little younger?
Well, it's really hard. I think it all depends on how much Bill has left in the tank and whether that's 3 to 5 years. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to relationships. And so as an owner, if I'm running my organization, I want to bring in a guy that works well with me, my GM, and the rest of our front office staff, and having a great open dialogue and conversations and going back and forth. Now, obviously, Bill is who he is, and I've never worked with him personally, so I don't know what it looks like when you're stepping into a new space. But that's the first thing, because I've been around some great organizations and some bad ones. And The good ones have great communication and respect for one another at the top, and that stuff trickles down. But if you got a lot of discourse in between coach, ownership, and GM, that's typically when you get all the drama and the stuff that you necessarily don't want to talk about as a football player. And you have to put a little time and energy into that distracts away from winning games on Sunday.
We know the organization you finished up with and went to the playoffs with in the Buffalo Bills, they had to weather a little bit of a storm of distraction. There was a lot of the conversation about your former coach, Sean McDermott, and his ability to lead that team beyond a certain point in the playoffs. How impressed have you been by their ability to navigate that and find their way into the postseason now?
It's been great. And, and every year, every single team goes through some type of adversity. I don't care if you were, 18-1 or 19-1. Patriots, right? If you go back and look at that year, whether it was injuries, something happened, people in the locker room, the same thing that Sean McDermott is going through. Every year you're going to have some controversy that you have to overcome, and it's about a group of men staying together. And if that's one thing that Sean preaches day in and day out about relationship, trust, understanding that process, and really cultivating great relationship, you're able to weather those storms and also weather guys missing out, right? When you think about Tre'Davious White, Matt Milano not there, losing Tremaine Edmonds in the offseason, losing Leslie Frazier, right? Having to make a transition and offensive coordinator in the middle of the year. The great teams are able to overcome those things. And for me, it was always about players' accountability, player leadership, and those guys stepping up. And I'm familiar with several of those guys still in that locker room, and I know they have the men that are willing to dive in and go a little extra yard so they can find a way. Now, they're in the playoffs, win or go home, and now they got to make sure that they're making those critical plays that I think we saw them do at the back end of the season that they weren't making up front. That's going to get them to where they need to be. So it's going to be fun to watch at the house on Sunday. I'm looking forward to matching up against Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers.
So let's go on the field for a moment in another game, Kansas City and Miami. Now, you've finished your career 4 years in Buffalo, so you know all about cold and snow. It's supposed to be like 0 degrees or maybe minus 10 with a wind chill. How does the game change from the perspective of you as a linebacker, whether how you're playing the run, how you have to cover receivers? Yeah. How does it change for the different players?
Well, it hurts more, for sure. But, if it's windy outside and, that quarterbacks are necessarily not going to be throwing the ball as effectively or efficiently. So you're thinking coach is going to run the ball a little bit more. So my mind frame is going more towards there. But I remember Oakland coming to Buffalo one year, right? And it was 40 degrees and sunny, and they were cold. So I can only imagine a team like Miami coming into these places, right? Your body's just not acclimated. Right? I lived in Phoenix for the last 4 years. I went to Buffalo last week. I was as cold, old man can be. So that's also going to play a psyche. So you have to mentally, right, prepare yourself to be in this weather and still be able to execute. And it's hard to do that when you're in the warm weather. But as far as linebacker play, right, just thinking about playing the run a little bit more, got to really stop the game and put them in some long distances and really make them execute in poor weather, which is really hard for quarterbacks, especially if they're not accustomed to it.
Lorenzo, only about a minute left here. I just want to ask you one more question about your former head coach and Sean McDermott, since it was asked. Do you think he can get them to a Super Bowl? Do you think he can get them over the hump, since that's been the criticism of him?
Oh, for sure. He's a great leader, a great man. And like I talked about Bill Belichick, he's not about just doing it his way. When I was there, had player leadership, be able to speak to him, make some changes, loosen up, make shifts, be flexible when you need to be. Right. But when we think about what happens on Sundays, again, I'm a player first. It comes down to guys executing. Right. Are you on sides? Or do you have great technique? Do you have great eyes? Did you do your block? Did you stay on sides? Right. Did you make the right read as a quarterback? Did I catch the football? Right. All those things. Sean can only do so much. And as we watch these football games, these guys are in place, but they're not making the plays. Can we have 11 men on the field? Right. Is that Sean McDermott or is that a guy not locked in the moment? Right. And so I think if there's a balance of player and coach responsibility, but if you ask me, it always falls on me as a grown man and as a player.
Yep. Agree there.
Couldn't agree more, and that was why you were one of the best. Lorenzo, we appreciate the time and insight. Thank you so much, man. Hopefully we'll get to talk to you again soon.
Always. Appreciate you guys.
right, so the last time the Lions hosted a playoff game, Ford Field wasn't even a hole in the ground here, and ticket prices for their game against the Rams, yes, the prodigal son is returning, and Matthew Stafford, most expensive get-in price for NFL Wild Card Weekend. Not a shocker to see Dolphins at the Chiefs. That's the cheapest. It's going to be negative 30 there with a wind chill. This is quite insane. And prime seats, by the way, for this Lions game per ticket IQ are going for $16,000 or more in Section 106 at the 50-yard line. Yeah, dudes, it's going to be a perfect spot to catch Matthew Stafford going up and down the field he spent so many years on. And this is what he had to say about returning to Detroit.
I'm not expecting anything, to be honest with you. I was asked this question a couple times, just by friends and family. And I think the biggest thing for me is just go experience whatever that experience is going to be. I understand, what the people of Detroit and what the city of Detroit meant to me in my time and my career, what they meant to my family. I hope they feel that back. But at the same time, I'm not a stranger to the situation and understanding that I'm the bad guy coming to town. I'm on the other team, and they don't want success for me. So whatever happens. I'm going to go experience it, play the game. Once the ball's snapped, man, let's go. Two good football teams, go compete and see what happens.
I mean, it's going to be a hell of a game, GoJo. And then on the other side, there's like Jared Goff, too. He's like, I'm not going to forget the way the Rams kind of dumped me. And he continues to use that as motivation. He says he will never forget that.
Yeah, he's spicy, Jared Goff, now that he's been steeped in Dan Campbell. We talked about that earlier in the season. But, yeah, I think both these guys, it was very different circumstances, Dad. I mean, for Matthew Stafford, I can't imagine it's going to be anything other than a rousing ovation for not only what that guy did there statistically, but the way he did it. Matthew Stafford was always seen as a capital F football guy, put it on the line physically for his team, even at a time where the franchise wasn't accomplishing the way that people wanted. But for Jared Goff, they dumped him. There is no question. And I think, Dad, that's the biggest worry here. Like I've said it a while ago, and I think I'm sticking with it. I think I'm picking the Rams in this game. Looking at what they've been able to do down the back half of the season, really once Matthew Stafford and Kyren Williams were reinserted healthy into the lineup, they're built with an incredibly sturdy foundation. I think both of these teams, the questions you would have would be on the defensive side of the ball, because the Lions certainly have been no slouch once their offensive line was re-solidified down the back half of the season, the great running back tandem that they've got there. But Matthew Stafford, I think, could be in a position to remind people of the difference between him and Jared Goff and why the Rams did what they did in the first place.
Yeah, this could be the game of the weekend. And you mentioned it with Detroit's O-line and covering them this year. And I remember going to the stadium, they had a billboard of the 5 offensive linemen, talking about the season and such. And I said, what they needed was 3 billboards to get all the offensive linemen on that were playing during the year, because they went through so many O-line combinations. But it has started to get a little more consistent toward the end of the year. I just love the offensive power for both teams, right? Between Stafford and what Kyren Williams has done in the backfield for the Rams, and then Puka stepping out the way he has. So what you had in Cooper Kupp as well. And then the two-headed monster, Montgomery and Gibbs in the backfield for Detroit. St. Brown, what he does on the outside. The big question mark, right, is Laporta, right? Sam Laporta, the rookie tight end who has set receiving records, hyperextended his knee. If he plays, going to wear a brace so it can't hyperextend again. He's going to try and play, or he's certainly going to try in warm-ups to see if he can
He was back
play.
in practice yesterday, and it sounds optimistic that he will play, was what he said talking to the media, to your point.
Going to be painful, no doubt about it. But as I said, get that brace to where he can't hyperextend it again. That's a big part. I mean, you talk about, and I don't want to compare longevity, but just the season of T.J. Watt missing for Pittsburgh. Sam Laporta became a monster presence in that offense for Detroit. Huge. So that could be a difference there. I honestly don't know which way to go in this game, Mike, the way they're playing right now. The Rams seem to be peaking at the right time. Demarcus Robinson has kind of stepped up as that third receiver between Puka and Cooper. The last couple of games, he's had, I think, at least 6 receptions. He started to step a little more in this one. Mike, I think I'm going to lean toward the home team, though, in this one, and Detroit. This is one of those, I won't be shocked either way. who wins this game, and that's normal on Wild Card Weekend. But with the way the Rams are playing and them being on the road here, but it's indoors, so weather won't have an effect. I think I'm gonna lead toward the home team in Detroit in this one.
All right, well, those are our thoughts on it. Emerson, the people have a chance on this to cash it or trash it, though, depending on how they feel like going over at our friends at DraftKings Sportsbook Fantasy. Or DraftKings Fantasy Sports, excuse me.
No, it's all good, man. It's all good. You've had a nice, clean show today. Time for Cash It or Trash It. Yes, presented by DraftKings Fantasy Sports. Check out what DraftKings has to offer this season with code GoJo, because life's more fun when you're in on the action. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. Rams 3-point dogs, as we have already mentioned, to the Lions here on Wild Card Weekend. So, Gojo, I feel like you're cashing the Rams covering because you're taking them outright to win here.
I am. And, Dad, this is an interesting one of how high this can climb, right? There have been 7 wild card teams to make the Super Bowl. Most recently, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2020, who did that as the 5 seed. But I guess I just look and go back to trusting what my eyes have told me about this team. And defensively, they've maximized their talent. We've talked so much about the rookies on offense. We had Steve Avila on the show earlier today. Puka Nacua has been great. But Kobe Turner has turned into a monster on the interior defensive line opposite Aaron Donald. You've gotten Byron Young on that group on the perimeter that's been able to get things done. Secondary does worry me a little bit at times, and we know the play-action passing game for Jared Goff and this Lions group, especially over the middle of the field, can certainly be deadly. But I just look at this team. The only team that they lost to in this stretch was the team that's the Super Bowl favorite right now, and the Baltimore Ravens, and they played them better than I think anyone we've seen down the stretch of this season.
Yeah, you mentioned Young and Turner. They both Young has 8 sacks, Turner 9 sacks, 16 tackles for loss between the two of them. And then, oh, by the way, there's a guy named Aaron Donald on that defense as well. Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Mike. So maybe it's more hoping for Detroit, considered the position they have been as opposed to the Rams, who just won the Super Bowl a few years ago. I'm going to trash this one, and I'm going to say Detroit wins and they cover as well, the 3 points. But listen, you're right about the Rams and how they're playing right now. They're one of the hottest teams in the NFL the way they're going. So as I said, it wouldn't shock me, but I'm glad to hear Sam Laporta is going to play. I think that's going to be a big difference for Detroit, and I think they can try and control that ball with that two-headed monster at running back.
Well, it seems like the public, guys, 61% of bets, 78% of the money is on the Rams +3, and I know you guys are split on this. Ford Field has been a friendly spot for Dan Campbell's team this season. 5-3 ATS at home. However, the Rams, one of the better teams to bet on the road, as they spotted 5-3-1 ATS away from SoFi Stadium.
It's interesting, too, in regards to that. People always want to say this time of year, well, what travels? Defense and a running game. And the Rams have had a running game that's extraordinarily simple, even though it presents with all the great motion and stuff that McVay likes to do. They've got receivers bought in as blockers. But, Dad, they've majored in being a downhill running team this year. And to give the Lions credit defensively, this showed up a lot against a Cowboys team that's not nearly the Rams' equal as a rushing attack. But since Week 10, the Detroit Lions, 3rd in rush EPA per play on defense, 5th in rushing success rate. They've been a much better run defense in the back half of the season, going up against one of the best they'll have faced in a while.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a great matchup. And I'm almost bummed these two are matching up and one will be out, kind of like Cleveland and Houston, that one of them is going to be out. So we'll see. Like I said, I think maybe Detroit can control a little more with running the ball. First down is always so key. It was such a big thing when I did that Miami-Buffalo game, how well Buffalo was gaining 4 and 5 yards on first down and making second down so much more manageable. To me, that's such a key down, and both these running games can have a great effect on that.
And listen, it'll be a great other audition. Ben Johnson, one of the hot coordinator names, coaching in the cycle this offseason. Raheem Morris on the Rams sideline, certainly going to be in the same vein. But coming up next, it's time to crown the one true Reese's King to finish off GoJo and Golic. All right, guys, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you into the weekend here. Super wild card weekend, baby. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating. Try and check us out live from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern every day, Monday through Friday. But if you can't miss us and you want to check out the show and our great guests, thank you to Rams rookie offensive lineman Steve Avila, and former Buffalo Bills linebacker Lorenzo Alexander for joining us today, helping us get ready for the weekend. If you missed it, check them out wherever you get your podcasts or as soon as we get done here right on the DraftKings YouTube channel. Guys, let's get to this, that, and the third and start off with this little college football news and notes here as we got stuff flying fast and furious. Dad, first and foremost, Florida State receiving some level 2 sanctions from the NCAA tied to NIL violations, something that we weren't sure if the NCAA was going to wade in the waters of punishing. They are levying significant penalties against Florida State here, including tied to their assistant coach, Alex Atkins, their offensive coordinator, who is found to have committed 2 level 2 violations, which include impermissible recruiting activity and facilitating impermissible contact with an NIL-related booster. He's going to be suspended the first 3 games of next season and given a 2-year show cause for anyone unfamiliar. That requires any school that tries to hire Alex Atkins to explain that decision to NCAA officials. I'm surprised Florida State went along with this, Dad. I wonder if fighting it would have been more trouble than it was worth, considering the environment that we know exists around the NCAA and around the way that people, especially lawmakers, people in Congress, view the current NIL landscape.
I mean, for somebody that ran, and I'm talking about the NCAA, ran from the NIL situation, now all of a sudden they're bowing up here. All of a sudden they're puffing their chest out and say, we will not allow enticement. And that's what this is about. They don't want you to entice the 18-year-old or in this case, transfer portal guy, especially to the collectives. They're supposed to be separate from the football team. But they got nailed, man. I mean, with a 2 years probation, scholarship reduction, official visits reduction, 1% of the budget as a fine.
The biggest one here too, Dad, is they now, with this particular collective that was associated, because it was essentially, it was reported that it was offensive lineman from another school. Alex Atkins was accused of driving that player to meet with this collective, and now they are not allowed to associate or accept help from that collective for the next year. Remember, collectives, these groups that have been helping pay players, were allowed to be associated with the school, but now this essentially puts that on pause, which means you're going to have to kind of reorganize some money.
I mean, I'm somewhat amazed at the NCAA, and all of a sudden, after running from this, coming in and trying to play tough guy now. And I'm with you. Florida State just kind of going along with this thing. That's surprising to me, but I wonder if this makes it more of an interesting situation for Mike Norvell if he truly is going to be recruited by Alabama.
Yeah, it certainly, I think, all factors into it. It being knocked down to a level 2 violation is noteworthy because while these penalties are steep, it's also not nearly as bad as it could be. See what might happen with the Michigan Wolverines and everything that went on there. Dad, we also had news, other news around there, including Quinn Ewers announcing that he was getting ready to come back to the University of Texas, which immediately had people wondering about the future of Arch Manning.
Well, exactly. I mean, Malik Murphy already, he took off from that team before the playoff game, the backup quarterback. Remember, Arch Manning was 3rd string. Now is Arch going to sit another year? Is he going to wait, or is he going to throw himself into the transfer portal? That's very interesting. Kalen DeBoer, the coach at Washington, canceled his hit that he normally does every week, right? And for those that are...
Or he was scheduled to do at least, yeah.
Scheduled to do, right. And for those Washington fans who have heard his name with Alabama, they have to be going, all right, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, everyone waiting to see what happens with that job, including Texas fans, because I think as long as Sark's in Texas, it sounds like Arch Manning is there to be around Steve Sarkisian and learn from him. They'd feel pretty safe, but no one's going to feel safe until the ink is dry on whoever is the next coach of the Crimson Tide. Emerson, let's get to that and back to our normal habitat of aliens in Miami heading to Brazil.
Guys, we have proof that even aliens need a tropical vacation here. New video shows 2 giant human-like creatures strolling along the foothills of a small Brazilian island in what some believe is proof that aliens are visiting Earth. If you're watching us now, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see the video on your screen. One of the 10-foot tall beings appears to take in the sights on an island 2 miles off the coast of southeast Brazil as another stands closely behind. That appears to be what the footage is showing us right now.
Give me a break.
What do you mean? Why That's real as hell.
It's always so far away or so grainy. We've been doing this since Bigfoot footage started popping out here. In a day and age where our cameras have more capabilities than ever on our phone, the fact that this is the best they can muster to me indicates that this is totally bunk.
And I'm getting bummed at this because I think we all believe there are extraterrestrials out there, right? Now, and are any of them on the Earth? I would like to believe that as well. How the hell can we not get a picture of them? How the hell do we not get a better picture? That's a ridiculous picture we're looking at. How do we know it's 10 foot, what we're looking at?
Well, I think what
are we doing?
I think what you do is you're able to realize where you are, your location compared to the location of the island, and then if you want to crunch some numbers, depending on how tall it is, like within the frame, you could see. You could kind of do some math. Yeah, no, those things are 10 feet tall. Trust me.
Okay. All right.
I long await the day where someone's finally like, oh yeah, I got this perfectly crystal clear footage that the government didn't take away from me when the Men in Black showed up on the scene, and now we get to actually see the aliens up close and personal, considering every new iPhone camera is touting some sort of new shot on. Yeah. It's going to be a shot on iPhone ad. That's how we're going to find out about the aliens. It's going to wind up on a billboard in Times Square.
What's sad is like there are so many fake videos out there that the few real ones, it's like everyone is going to doubt immediately and be like, no, it's fake. Like there's a few good apples in this batch.
A few bad apples spoiling the alien footage bunch, as I've often said. Let's get to a group that has no bad apples. Wow. Guys, we got Reese's Power Rankings going on right now. Orange Olive 7 on Twitter yesterday put out the picture that displayed the full depth and breadth of the Reese's catalog and asked, what's your favorite? Dad, as someone who's made a now trend online recently of reviewing largely Reese's products because they've got so much variety in the catalog, I can unequivocally say, still to this day, after sampling pretty much everything that's on this page, the Reese's Fast Break Bar is not only one of the best candy bars of all time, but it's certainly, in my opinion, the best item in the Reese's catalog as it currently sits.
I love there's 25 different products here. If you look at this thing, it is incredible, and I will try all of them. I'm not so high on the organic or the zero sugar.
Yeah, it's
if I'm going to eat a candy bar, I'm going to eat a candy bar, I love the variety. How about the Reese's Big Cup with the potato chip? I mean,
Dad, let me tell you, a textural wonder.
Yes,
it is an absolute delight. That little crunch.
Completely agree. And then you got the big Reese's cup with the Reese's Pieces in the middle of it. And I love because, listen, in my era growing up, the Mallow cup, where you got the Mallow cup and you had the card in there with a point value on that you could use to get stuff. They have the Reese's with the Mallow cup top. There are so many great varieties to this. That, you could just eat this candy bar forever in all the different ways you could eat it, all different varieties.
And put all of them in the freezer. Not the fridge. Put all of them in the freezer. Eat them fresh out of the freezer.
I actually like them a little bit on the warmer side. I think the freezer robs them of some of the chocolatey, peanut buttery taste.
Yeah, no, you seem like
and by the way, for what it's worth in this also, I do want to also make the proclamation, because while I think the Fast Break Bar is the best of the bunch, if we're going to do the more traditional route or anything tangent to the cups, it is always the Reese's holiday shapes in any of their form, whether it's the tree, whether it's the pumpkin, whether it's the Easter egg, all better than the original Reese's cup. Upon this rock, I will always build my church.
1,000%. And the egg is the top one out of all the shapes because of like the surface area and the ratio.
The ratio. It's all about the ratio
of the chocolate to the peanut butter.
And I love how many king size things they have as well.
Yeah, you're a king size guy.
I mentioned the potato chip. They have one with pretzel bits as well. Just fantastic. They love a little crunch. It's a chef's kiss.
They do. Reese's loves a little crunch. We love a little Reese's. We hope you love a little us. And if you do, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. And check us out here, as always, live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks so much. Enjoy Wild Card Weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday.